In the aftermath of the Second Nuclear War of 1957, many weird things happened. Perhaps the weirdest of all was the fact that the supernatural creatures of folklore, the werewolves and vampires, were suddenly real. As a result, I grew up staying in nights. I never went to school without my crucifix and holy water, and we rubbed our doors and windows with garlic. Of course, we ate lots of garlic too. In fact, we reeked of it. It was stinky but necessary for survival. The air raid sirens would scream on nights when active vampires were known to be at large. On nights with sirens, I would cower in bed, wondering what was going on outside, but too afraid to look. Besides, the curtains were shut tight. Still, daylight hours were relatively safe, especially sunny days. So we did normal kid things like explore the woods and the surrounding countryside. One summer afternoon in '68, when I was a lucky 13 years old, I was up on the roof of my apartment building with Tony, whose eagle eyes spotted a yellow-brown structure out in the middle of a farmer's field. "What is that thing?" "Looks like Dracula's castle," Tony said. We knew about Dracula, not that the old people encouraged any interest in the supernatural. But then he added the fatal words, "Want to check it out?" I didn't, but as no guy wants to look like a coward in front of his best friend, I had to go. I figured the thing, whatever it was about 3 miles by bike, and as it was early afternoon, we could easily make it there and back in daylight. Biking out there, riding along the tightrope between the busy road and the ditch, was the truly scary part. Those big trucks gave us no quarter. Never mind vampires. A dump truck could squish you dead. Dead. Dracula's castle turned out to be the remains of an old farm silo, weathered a leprous yellow and rising from the ruins of what must have been a barn. We parked our bikes by a large dark gap in the crumbling foundation, and peering into the blackness within, we instantly drew back. "Man, that stinks," Tony yelped. "Smells like something died in there." "Strike a match," Tony ordered. "Huh? What if it blows up?" I protested. In the end, it was Tony, who was always much more aggressive than me, who struck a match and revealed it. It was a plain wooden coffin in which lay the body of what might have been a man. The greasy and bloated yellow-white skin made it hard to tell. In fact, the pale body was so gross, it made me think of a worm or slug. Indeed, the only real color was the red-black blood that drooled from its gaping mouth. It was a vampire, beyond doubt. I was too frightened to approach, but not Tony, who, striking another match, stepped over to the coffin to get a better look at the vermin within. I'd always thought that vampires had red eyes, but the eyes of this thing were jet black, two pools of Stygian darkness that positively radiated gloom and sheer terror. With a start, I realized it could see us, that it was watching us. I warned Tony, who grabbed a handful of dirt off the ground and threw it in the vampire's face. "Take that, you, and not being able to think of an appropriate swear, finished with, "You undead, you." It was a pleasure to step out into the sunlight again. We better tell the cops about this right away. Yeah, Tony muttered. But in the end, we told no one. Not that I didn't try. Several times I was about to tell my folks, but found I couldn't speak. My brain was overwhelmed by a mental fog, and I lost the plot. I was asked several times if I was sick or had a cold. Eventually, my mom decided I'd had too much sun and should go lie down. Of course it was the vampire freezing my brain, my mind. I lay down and instantly fell into a troubled sleep, where I saw the vampire, now lean and hungry looking, rise from its coffin and slip into the night, where it began floating away from the ruined barn and towards me. It floated down the C&R tracks, down Spears Road, down Kerr Street, until it was floating outside my third-floor bedroom window. It spoke to me, but the voice I heard was Tony's. "Hey, man, let me in. You gotta let me in. The vampire came to my house and got in, and now he's after me. You gotta let me in." I was completely terrified and wanted to hide under the blankets, but I was also weirdly fascinated and wanted to go to the window and let him in. He was my best friend and he was in trouble, so I had to let him in. How he could be outside my window, 30 feet above the ground, never entered my confused brain. I had pulled back the curtain and could see both Tony and the vampire, and their fangs, floating outside my window. And then my parents were in the room and shut the curtains as Dad pulled me away. And outside, the sirens began to wail. That night, I slept in my parents' bedroom, and then had a brain fever, which lasted 2 months. And when I eventually got back to school, Tony was gone. He was my best friend, and they told me he'd never been a student there. And when I went to his house, a different family was living there. When I asked my folks about him, they tried to tell me my best friend was Rob. Rob, a guy I hardly knew. It's now 1984, and vampires are rare, but still out there. The sirens still wail. My assumption is that Tony and the vampire, and maybe Tony's whole family, were destroyed by the authorities and out of sight, out of mind. Even the old silo and the ruins of the barn are gone, asphalted over. So Tony apparently never existed. But you know, sometimes during the watches of the night, I lie awake listening for his well-remembered voice. "Hey, man, let me in. You gotta let me in. The vampire came to my house and got in, and now he's after me. You gotta let me in. You got to." The moral of the story: never forget your friends, and especially not your enemies. If this is your first visit to my channel, please consider subscribing. My name is Warren, and I write and tell original ghost and horror stories. This October, I thought I would present stories featuring such classic monsters as vampires and werewolves in honor of Halloween. Please let me know in the comments if you enjoyed today's story. Cheers! till midnight. Cheers. In the aftermath of the Second Nuclear War of 1957, many weird things happened. Perhaps the weirdest was the fact the supernatural creatures of folklore, the werewolves and vampires, were suddenly real. As a result, I grew up staying in nights. At least I was supposed to stay in. Now, werewolves were pretty rare, and were only around during the period of the full moon, and I wanted to see one. Not that you could walk around on nights when the moon was full. There was a curfew, and people my age were not permitted to be at large. Still, where there's a will, there's a way. During my first year of high school, when I was 14, I got my hands on a telescope in order to do a little astronomy. Lunar astronomy. I asked my mom if it would be okay to set up the telescope on our third-floor balcony. "You can't see the moon from there," she said. "Besides, if people see you, they'll think you're a peeping Tom." "Well, I'll go up on the roof then. I'll be able to see the moon, and no one will be able to see me." "No, I don't want you going up there." "Why? No one can see me up there." "I said no." But where there's a will, there's a way. Mom worked on the line in an auto plant, usually 4 to midnight. She would phone me during the course of her shift to make sure I was home and being a good boy. But she never called after 9:30, which meant I'd have 2 hours to play with, up on the roof. My chance came in October, when there was a full hunter's moon, and I decided to go werewolf hunting. We'd had werewolf scares during the previous full moons. My idea was to set up the telescope on the roof so I could scan the city, and if there was a werewolf or police action, I would have a bird's eye view. The moment I stepped out onto the roof, I could hear the air raid sirens announcing a werewolf at large. I quickly set up the telescope and had an eagle-eye view of the show unfolding below me. At first, all I could see was a stream of cop cars, sirens blaring, red lights flashing, racing up and down the nearby streets. But of any werewolf, there was no sign at all. I swung the telescope around, trying to get a glimpse of what they were chasing, and scanning the nearby train tracks, I saw it. It was a huge gray wolf, standing at least 7 feet high, and running on its hind legs, running like a human being. I could see its head, which had the muzzle and pointed ears of a wolf, and glowing red eyes that seemed to be staring towards me, and I realized with a start that despite the huge distance between us, the thing could see me. The werewolf stared directly into my eyes. and howled. Overwhelmed by fear, I picked up the telescope, then ran down the stairs, down 10 stories, and back to the apartment. I didn't know how it could see me. I only know it did. Did it know where I lived? But that was impossible. But werewolves were impossible, or had been impossible. I wanted to hide, and did the only thing I could think of. I went to bed and dreamed. I dreamed I was on Kerr Street, and the werewolf was there. There were no cops, nobody, just the werewolf. It was even bigger, at least 10 feet tall, with saliva drooling from its gaping maw. Somehow I got inside the building. I ran for the open elevator, jumped in, and took it to the 13th floor. I didn't want the werewolf to know the floor where I lived. So I took it to the 13th floor, and when the elevator door opened, the werewolf was standing there, grinning, and its mouth was so wide, its teeth so sharp. I jumped back into the elevator and woke up. A woman was screaming, "My mom!" I jumped out of bed. My mom stood in the doorway, staring towards the balcony's glass door, where the werewolf was hanging onto the balcony rail, staring in at us with those flaming red eyes. Somehow it had managed to climb 3 floors to our apartment. We were both blinded by searchlights, followed by gunfire, automatic weapons. Mom grabbed me and we ran into the hallway, slamming the apartment door behind us. We spent the night with neighbors. Somehow the werewolf got away. The only sign of it was some bullet marks on the side of the balcony. Mom suspected I'd done something to attract the werewolf, but she never said anything directly. She didn't have to worry. From then on, I stayed in nights. No way would I leave the apartment after dark. I was too afraid the werewolf would see me, would find me, but it never did. Not that it left me unscarred. There were the dreams, or should I say nightmares, that persist to this day. I dream I'm out on Kerr Street and the werewolf is chasing me. No cops, nobody, just me and the werewolf. The werewolf is even larger, at least 10 feet tall, with saliva drooling from its gaping maw. Somehow I get inside the building. I run for the open elevator, jump inside, and take it to the 13th floor. I didn't want the werewolf to know the floor where I lived. So I take it to the 13th floor, and when the door opens, the werewolf is standing there, grinning, and its mouth is so wide, its white glowing fangs so sharp. I turn to go back in the elevator, but the door is closed. The werewolf opens its maw, the fetid stench of its breath almost knocking me over as it says, "Going down." Isn't that a howl? The moral of the story? You should always listen to Mummy. Karis knows how to read his Tana leaves. If this is your first visit to my channel, please consider subscribing. My name is Warren, and I write and tell original ghost stories and horror stories. This October, I thought I would present stories featuring such classic monsters as vampires and werewolves in honor of Halloween. Please let me know in the comments below if you enjoyed today's story. Till midnight. Cheers. Video footage used in today's video, which shows the full hunter's moon of October 2025, courtesy of Dr. Curious, while the music was the classic Ghost Processional by that patron of the internet, Kevin MacLeod. Dear listeners, do you dream in Technicolor? I dream in black and white, and my dreams are all variations on a theme. Like tonight. Tonight I dreamed I was walking through the downtown of my city during the wee small hours of the morning. Everything was closed, and the place was deserted. The only sound I was aware of, at first, was the slap of my shoes on the sidewalk. But then I heard another sound, the sound of something scraping across the cold concrete. I spun around to find the source of the noise and saw the Mummy Man. Saw the Mummy Man was stalking me. Beware, beware the Mummy Man. You all know the Mummy Man, for that was our name for him when we were kids. You've seen him, even his Aztec cousin, on the Late Late Show. Tall, one-eyed, and covered by dirty gauze, a bandage trailing behind him like a stream of loose toilet paper. He, or it, held its right arm out, its hand ready to take you by the throat in order to strangle you. On the Late Late Show, particularly in the old Universal horror films starring Lon Chaney Jr., the mummy shuffled after his victim, moving as if drunk, exhausted, or suffering from serious arthritis. But like the Mounties, he always got his man, or victim. My initial reaction was, he'll never catch me. But then I remembered, no matter how slowly he moved, the mummy always caught his victim and caught them by the throat. So I ran. I know it sounds foolish, but I ran like hell. After several blocks I turned, only to find the mummy behind me, and the exact same distance behind me. How could he plod along like that and still keep up with me? I continued running, full tilt. I kept to well-lit streets. In an earlier nightmare, I tried running through an alley, only to find it was a dead end. And when the mummy came shuffling up behind me, I was dead. Suddenly I spotted my car, parked at the curb below a streetlight. I threw myself towards it and managed to open my door when a rough hand with an iron grip closed around my throat and began choking the life out of me. It was the mummy. How did he get here? I blacked out, only to wake up in my own bed, soaked with sweat and shaking with fear. On another night, I dreamed I was walking through the darkened corridors of the Natural History Museum. It was after hours, and I was alone. I might have been a security guard, I guess. As I made my way through the bowels of the lower level, I heard a shuffling sound behind me, and looking back, at the far end of the corridor, I made out the dim figure of the mummy, and he was on my trail. I knew where the exit was, and I didn't waste any time heading for it. And as I hurried past the dinosaurs and prehistoric animals, I kept turning around, and each time I did, the mummy had drawn ever closer. I began to run. The exit was at the far end of the Egyptian section, and I was running through it when a mummy case cracked open, and he was right there in front of me, taking me by the throat with his iron hand and squeezing. Lights out! But these were only nightmares. In reality, I was safe at home and in bed. I was thinking about getting up for a drink of water when I heard a noise out in the hall. A shuffling noise. I pinched myself. I was indeed awake. Someone or something was in the house. The mummy loomed in my bedroom doorway. There was nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. And my only weapon, the only weapon that came to hand, was a pillow? The mummy stumbled over to the bed, his hand poised to strangle me. Then, in abject terror, I blurted, "What do you want?" He opened his dry mouth, emitting a noisome stench that almost finished me where I lay. Then, in a faint, ghostly whisper, he said, "Have you got any bandages?" I reeled in shock. "You've been chasing me all these nightmares? For bandages?" Oh well, it could have been a whole lot worse. At least he didn't say, "Tag, you're it." The moral of the story? Mummy always said to keep a supply of bandages at hand, for being unable to find a Band-Aid when you're bleeding all over the place can be a real mother. If this is your first visit to my channel, please consider subscribing. My name is Warren, and I write and tell original ghost and horror stories. Original ghost and horror stories. This October, I thought I would present stories featuring such classic monsters as vampires and werewolves, and now the Mummy Man, in honor of Halloween. Please let me know in the comments if you enjoyed today's story. Until midnight, until Halloween, cheers. Pictures used in today's video, courtesy of Pix here, that's PX here, while the music was the classic Ghost Processional by that patron of the internet, Kevin MacLeod.